Okay. Hello, everyone. This is Megan. I'm a volunteer coordinator with Morningstar Leaders. We're happy to be here today with one of our community educators and artists, Jacob Butler. We're going to give him some time to introduce himself, but first we want to go ahead and introduce Kenzie, another one of our volunteer coordinators.
Hi everyone, my name is Mackenzie Doherty. I am from the Pascua Yaqui tribe, and I'm another event coordinator here at Morningstar.
So the purpose of today's event is really to be able to share information about Jacob's culture, the kind of crafts that he does, and the things that he's doing in his community. I think at this time it's hard to come together and learn about one another's tribes, learn about one another's cultures, and share that. So when we think about this time, we really want to give it back to our community because that's important to keep educating. And so giving this time to Jacob to share a little bit about himself is really exciting, and we're looking forward to it. So go ahead and take it away, Jacob.
Well, hello everybody. I'm Jacob Butler. I'm Onk Akimel O'Odham. I'm from Lawrence and Jeanette Butler, and I've lived here all my life, and I'm the current Community Gardens Coordinator for the Cultural Resource Department. I am also the chair of the nonprofit organization Native Seed Search, and I'm soon to be on the board of the Friends of Pueblo Grande, so that we can help out with the events that go on in and around the Pueblo Grande, so that they're more culturally sensitive and relating to the people that still exist, that call that place the home of their ancestors. And so I do a few different things. But I think what I'm here to talk to you guys tonight is primarily about the artwork that I do, and specifically shells, and how I got into that, and why I feel it's important, and what it's done for me in my life. And so I thank you all for taking the time to spend with me, and I want to thank the facilitators for allowing me to speak. And I may say a lot, so I apologize in advance. But yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Jacob. So we're going to go ahead and get started with this presentation. Jacob has a really great video that was recorded by the herd, and we want to go ahead and share that with you guys. And then after, he's going to go ahead and share a little bit about his crafts.
Ago, maybe a little bit longer. So when I was 18 and 19, I was trying to stay out of trouble, and I just had a baby, and I was learning more about our culture, our Otomima dog. No matter how far I get into this, I'm still going to learn little nuances of how it was done. This is an ancient art form that for about 1,000 years wasn't practiced. And so there's a lot of loss right there. And so we're all just trying to experiment and find out how close we can get to it. And so this is something that's totally different than basketry or pottery. The Onk Akimel O'Odham, the Onk Akimel O'Odham, and all the other tribes from Salt River all the way down to where we're at today in the Sea of Cortez, we're all the same people. And so we all have a relationship with the ocean. Our people were descendants of the Hulgum. You know, like the word Hulgum, right? So the word Hulgum basically just means, it's a polite way of saying those that have passed. And so when you talk about people that are no longer here, then you say Hulgum. And so then archaeologists took that word and turned it into the word that we know today as the Holcomb. Was that when you wear this shell, you not only recognize yourself and affiliate yourself with one of us, but you give respect to the fact that we depend on water, and that water is that life-giving resource that we couldn't survive in the desert without. But it also shows that we have a deeper connection to the Kachk, or to this ocean. And so it ties us all together. And I started it about 20 years ago, maybe a little bit longer. So when I was 18 or 19, I was trying to stay out of trouble, and I just had a baby, and I was learning more about our culture, our Pima. No matter how far I get into this, I'm still going to learn little nuances of how it was done. This is an ancient art form that for about 1,000 years wasn't practiced. And so there's a lot of loss right there. And so we're all just trying to experiment and find out how close we can get to it. And so this is something that's totally different than basketry or pottery, where those are continued traditions that stand the test of time, that are time honored, that have been passed down from generation to generation. And in this instance, we don't have that opportunity. And so we have to look at the land and in the context that you find them, what you find them with, tells you the kind of tools that were used. What you find over there shows you the relationship with the areas over here. So the fact that these shells were primarily used for etching is pretty awesome, because this is the primary site for them. And just a mile across these dunes is where we gather salt. And so we have these connections with this land. And
So that little video that you guys were able to just watch, I apologize for some of the sound, and I apologize for my voice as well. I don't really think I sound the way I sound when I hear myself, and I think that's true for everybody. But I don't think I sound as razzed out as I do when I hear myself. But yeah. So the whole thing about this art form, this art form of etching shell, it started like 1,400 years ago, and it was started here in the valley, and there's sites. Well, I would say here around Gila River area, and there's sites like Casa Grande and Snaketown that are just filled with etched shell, and they think those may be the sites that this art form truly originated from. And when I talk about etched shell, I talk about those big yellow shells that were displayed. I'm looking around for one, but I'm going to cover my face here. And this is the raw etch shell, or raw shell that you would etch traditionally. And so this is called Lavacardium elatum, and it's a deep sea shell. And so the only time you find them is when they get washed up by tidal currents onto the ocean, the beach. And so we live hundreds of miles away from the ocean, the Sea of Cortez, but we have these extensive trade systems and trails that led the way over there. So some people say, oh, well, they must have traded because they're so far away from that they had to have gotten those from other people. And I would say on some occasions that may be true. But we have trail systems that not only come from those areas, but lead to those areas, that go past the Pinacate Mountains and past the Altar Desert that's basically almost barren of any kind of life. And our people took these pilgrimages to go and gather salt. And salt is not only something to flavor your food, but it was a medicine, it was a spiritual medicine as well as a physical medicine, and it's something that we needed to exist here in the desert. And so we would take these pilgrimages, and young men would obligate themselves to go 4 times in their life to gather this salt. And when they went through those mountain ranges, there was Tanahas that had just been discovered, and Tanahas are these basins in the mountain that collect water. And so the only way they were able to get that far is they would take the opportunity to stop at these little water catchments and gather water so that they could make that long journey across the Altar Desert to the Sea of Cortez, where the salt and the shell were. And what's evident in that site is that there's petroglyphs that are in the image of this shell here, and they're all over those sites. And so they're leading the way to the area that we would gather these shells. And so even before you get to the Piñacates, they've discovered petroglyphs that are marked with shell depictions, showing that they're on that shell trail or that salt pilgrimage trail. And so the first time I was ever able to go there was about 17 years ago. And I had been trying to learn about this art form, like that video said, since I was a teenager. The first time I ever seen anything about it was in Washington, D.C. I had the opportunity to go with a scout troop out here. And our scout troop from Salt River was the first scout troop in all of the country that was all Native American scout troop. And so we were requested to go to a jamboree. And it was an international gathering of all these scouts from around the world, and we were asked to be part of it. So we raised money and we went, and the tribe supported us. And this was before gaming and all the resources that we had today. So we had like burrito sales and all the other things that you do to raise money, right? And we went, and along the way, we got to stop over in Washington, D.C., and we went to the Smithsonian, and we went to all the different museums. And I'm not sure if it was the Museum of Natural History or the Museum of Man, but I seen a site exhibit that was showing the salt flats, the O'Odham salt flats in Mexico, and our relationship to that land. And there was some shell there, and there was some edge shell. And ever since then, I think I was like 14. I was just like amazed that we had the ability to carve these shells in such a way, and so I wanted to learn, and I read up a lot of different studies on it, and it always was something that I was curious about. And then as an adult, I finally actually got to go there, and so 17 years ago, I was actually requested to be part of a group of cultural leaders and people working in preservation in NAGPRA to go look at this ancient site of a spring that we once gathered water from in medicinal salt, and basically take record of that area before it was impacted by a highway. And so there was this interstate actually that was going through that was going to really impact the health of that site. And so many people thought that it was going to be the last time that we'd have the opportunity to see that area. And so I was fairly young. I'd already been making shells, and so making edge shells. And so they asked if I can go and basically help people out because I was younger, and there was a lot of people in their 80s, 70s that went on that trip, and I'll forever be grateful for being in their presence because a lot of them have passed on now, and we kind of got in trouble at first when we first went because they said, taking a trip to the salt is a sacred pilgrimage, and you have to suffer, and you have to push yourself to get there. And we were taking the site tour basically. Then it was only supposed to take four hours. and we were going to end up in Puerto Penasco or Rocky Point, and we're going to spend the night over there and have dinner and come home. But there's something to be said about suffering and having to go through trials to really appreciate what you actually get to see once you get there. And when we went there, it was just like, I'm not sure if y'all are familiar with Gilligan's Island, but like it was truly supposed to be a 3-hour tour that turned into like a little bit of a nightmare for about a day. And we came in through an area called San Luis, and we drove on the beach for 80 miles. There was no roads at the time through the Altar Desert, so we had to go around. And we drove on that beach for 80 miles with I think there was like 20 cars. There was about 80 people that were in there, and they were all instructed. The participants from the Tohono O'odham Nation, Nag-Chin Indian Community, Gila River, and Salt River were all instructed to bring 4x4s. But when we went, there ended up being the big passenger vans and a bunch of cars without 4-wheel drive. And so we're driving through the sand dunes, and within like 30 minutes of being on the beach, there was cars that were like totally sunk into the sand, and so a bunch of us were out there digging with shovels, pulling tires out, pulling cars out, hitching them up to other cars. And local residents of the area came out to help us, and they stayed with us the whole time, helping us navigate through that area. And there was even a time that we had to cross part of the desert, and the only place to cross was on a train track. And so we had this 20-car caravan driving down the train track, and the gentleman that was helping us said, "Oh, there's no vehicles here, or there's no trains here, so you should be okay." And so we're towards the end of that trail of cars, and you hear a horn, and it's a train coming down the tracks right at us, right? And so we had to quickly jump off and get on the shoulder. But so it was definitely a trial. And by the time the last car got stuck, we were burned out, and everybody had really put in their effort. And I had even got stuck in a quicksand under the truck. So I was digging the tires out, and I realized my body was underneath the sand, and it was filling up. And so those the guys from Nag-Chin actually had to dig me out before I was crushed by one of the trucks. And so by the time that last car came, and we were basically done, and I said, let's just give it one more shot. Let's do it. And so there was about 5 of us on the front end of a little Jeep, and we picked that whole car up so that we can get something underneath it. And that was like the most awesomest thing to me, And then, when we got out of that little stuck there, we turned the bend, and we were right there to the inlet of where the salt was. So it was like an awesome thing, and the sun had just been setting. We weren't even supposed to be there till lunch. We were supposed to be done at 10, and by the time 11 o'clock came, we were just barely going into the land where the salt was, and we were barely leaving the ocean. And so they had asked if we could just make camp there. And everybody was tired, and we all wanted to go sleep. But as is customary, we gather and we talk. We share why we're there and why it was an important thing for us to be a part of, and who we are. And so we all gathered around. There's this huge circle of like 80 people, and they said, "Well, just because there's so many people, just say your name and where you're from." And that didn't turn out that way. We sat and listened for about an hour as people talked and shared who they were and why this was so important to them. And at the time I was kind of tired and griping and sore and wanted to go to sleep. And now all those stories of those people that had been there as children or had taken that run before it stopped, and or heard their parents or their fathers talk about taking those runs, like those are stories that I always hold with me, and that those are opportunities that I'm probably never going to have again. I'm never going to have again because they're no longer here. And when we got to that site, it was untouched, and there was a machit, or what people call grinding stones. And the machit was red, and it was porous. And the thing about those red grinding stones, they're called trophimatates, and we call them machits. But that material is only found in one area that makes that red stone. And it's found right here in Salt River at a mountain here in our community. And they found out later that that material was shared all over the country, and they find it everywhere. And to see it there as an offering was just awesome. And there's these big shoulder pots and arrowhead points and all kinds of things that were laid by that spring that we got to see the next day when we woke up. And I think that was the first time that anybody had been there for years. And so just a couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to return. And when we went back, the gentleman that was their family actually protects the salt now. He said, you know, the last person to touch feet on this beach here, it was 15 years ago, and there was a group of O'Odham that came to see the site, and it was an awesome feeling to know that I was a part of that. And when we went back to that same site where we seen that spring where we gathered water and they said their blessings, you know, a lot of that stuff had been taken. The machad wasn't there, the pots weren't there. And it was a sad thing. And they explained how when that site was discovered or the area was being impacted by the interstate, how archaeologists and anthropologists had gone in there for museums and taken a lot of the artifacts, and that they were scattered across Mexico. And so it was a good thing to hear that it's being protected now, and that there's these little helos or what are they called? They're not called helos. It's a group of families that come together to protect those sites, and it was both sad and awesome to hear at the same time. You know, it was sad that happened, but it was awesome that people cared enough to protect it. And they even have a sign there that says it's an archaeological recurso de O'Odham, or as an archaeological site and cultural resource of the O'Odham. And so it's a cool place to be, and I've been honored and blessed to be there a few times in my life, and hopefully it's there well into the future. And so that's where we gather the shell. And we bring them all the way back here, and they're in that rough form, right? But then we turn those shells into things that are even more beautiful than the shell that we gathered on that beach. And what really struck like a chord with me was the way that they made these shells. They etched them. And so this is a form of the etching here, and I'm not sure if you can pick up the detail, but so this is the man in the maze etched into the shell. And a lot of people ask, well, how did you carve that? That must have taken a lot of skill in your hand because it's really even. But they're not carved. And that's what's so cool about this, is they're not carved. So about 1400 years ago, our O'Odham figured out a way to etch the shell with an acid. And it was done here in our people's communities about 300 years before it had been done anywhere else in the world. So the O'Odham and our ancestors, our O'Odham, are the first people in the world to ever etch shell with an acid. And in Europe, they did it in a similar fashion, but it took them about 300 or 400 years later. And so to me, that's just something that's special. And I started asking people, you know, like, well, how was this done and how do we do it? And I studied all these books, and archaeologists have a theory, and I tried to apply all the knowledge that I can get. And then I started learning other techniques and other practices, and we would use these because they're hollow, right? We would use these to drink wine during these wine ceremonies to call on the rain for our plantings. And I tried to etch the shell with the saguaro juice, and it didn't work. And so then I made some other stuff, and I did some other stuff, and they say that the wine is what etches it. So I made wine. I learned how to make wine, you know, and then I applied that knowledge to this art form. And then I tried it again, and it never worked, you know, and then I learned, you know, all the things that they do to wine to keep it preserved. And then I found out the way that the process that it takes to get it to the form where it will actually eat that shell. And it's not the way that archaeologists wrote. And so it's a good starting point, but it took years to learn. And I think that's awesome is finding all those significant things and trying to think about how that was discovered in the first time, and if our ancestors did the same thing. And these are the traditional shells that were etched, or these large shells. But today, a lot of people will etch the smaller shells and they'll make them into bracelets, necklaces. So this one here, I'll see if I can show you the detail, but this one here has been rubbed with the red clay so that you can see the river designs on it. Well, this is a glycymera shell. And this shell is actually a fresh shell, like it just came out of the water and it probably still had the clam in it. The shells that we gather off the beach are very bright and white, and they're fossilized. So they're stronger and they're heavier. And they say that they have a density that's closer to jade. And so those shells traditionally weren't etched. And so I started learning all this stuff through collections, and I visited all the collections all over the Arizona here, Arizona State Museum, Pueblo Grande, Casa Grande, Tonto National Forest. And I looked at all their stuff, and I started to take notes, and I started doing it for a while. And a person that I have a lot of respect for, and was actually like my baseball coach growing up. His name is Royce Manuel, and he won an artist leadership grant to go and study the collection in DC, or actually Sweetland, Maryland, for burden baskets, I believe. Oh no, for bows. And I'll always be grateful for this opportunity, but Royce and Debbie Manuel actually were able to talk our community into funding my trip to go with them. And so I was able to go with them and study the collections of shells while they were looking at bows, and I learned so much. And we were out to eat one night, and the manager of that program said, "Well, how come you don't do it? How come you don't sign up for a grant to learn more?" And I said, "I've never written a grant, and I don't know if I can do that." And Royce and the gentleman's name was Kiva, and they said, "You never know if you don't try, you can, and just be like Nike and just do it." So I went home and I kind of blew it off. And about a month before the deadline, they asked me, "Well, have you written that grant? Did you try?" And I said, "No." And I just kept hearing that, "Just do it," And so I sat up, and I think 3 days before the deadline, right? It was like 3 days before the deadline, I sat up and I wrote it, and I asked for letters from different people. And the day that it was due, I submitted it, and I was actually awarded that. And I got to go a second time, and I got to study even closer all the things that I wanted to follow up on. So I learned a lot, and I was able to come home and teach our community these classes on this art form. And I think that's really been like a big factor in a lot of the decisions that I make today. Prior to working with these shells in that larger fashion and studying them on the other side of the country, I was also already making pottery and gourd craft and other things. And I went to school for a short time for commercial arts. And so when I got into that, I like to tell my wife and my family that I have a really big problem with focus. And so some things that I start maybe in shell, or have an idea that I want to put into a shell, I'll end up expressing that in pottery. Or I'll work on something for so long and I'll do a series of shells and I'll just stop. and I'll work on pottery or painting or crafting something else. And recently I got into silverwork, and then I come back to it. And so things that I put down last year, it's weird. I work in these cycles, so I come back to them around the same times. But along the way, people have seen my work and they've asked me to do things, and the whole idea of like, you'll never know unless you try, and just do it. Like, I've tried things and failed, but you'll never know if you're going to succeed unless you try. And so I think by not trying, you've already failed. And so a lot of opportunities have came my way that I don't think otherwise would have, from some of the things that I've done, and like with this art form here, they saw it, and a baseball player from the Colorado Rockies was asking around and asking if any tribal members could decorate his glove. And so somebody had mentioned me, and they got in touch with me, and I originally told them no, and aside from all the artwork that I do and the gardening stuff, I'm still very much affected by the stuff that happens here in communities like ours, and I'm not immune to some of the tragedies that befall your family, and one of my little brothers had just passed away like 3 or 4 days before I was asked to decorate that glove. And so I said no, I don't want to do anything. And then the more I thought of it, I shared with the gentleman, why I didn't want to do it. And he said, well, if you want to make it for him, you can. And he's like, but if you don't, I totally understand. And I shared with him, well, I've never done anything like this, but I'll try. And so I think I took all that energy that I was feeling, grieving for my brother, and I put it into that glove. And I didn't want to make it all about my brother. I wanted it to reflect our community, but I was thinking about him the whole time. And at the very end, I left a little detail on that glove that represented my little brother. And so then I shared that with that gentleman, and he was like so excited. And they put it up on Coors Stadium on their big teleprompter, and they highlighted it, and it was an awesome thing. And that would have never happened had I just said no, and had I been too scared to try. And so, I don't know, I think the biggest thing I could tell you guys is to just try, to get out there and do the best that you can. It's easy. It's easy to say no, and you're going to fail at things, but the rewards and the joy that you get from actually succeeding sometimes is well worth it, and I've done murals for like this place called the Arizona Boardwalk. It's where a big aquarium is, and I've done murals from that. I was actually able to do like 12 murals for that. I've never done a mural, but they believed in me, and so I said, well, if you believe me, I'll try it, and I did. And then from there, I've actually designed the front ends of like water parks. I've helped design hotels that are currently being erected. I've designed gates for historic buildings out of metal that I've never worked with before, and I had the opportunity to provide all of the art, or the ornamentation, like the shell and the resources for a video for the Casa Grande National Monument. It's the first national monument in the country, and it's a monument that honors our people and the time here. And they were doing an orientation video, and they had these actors, and they wanted them to be adorned in the fashion of that time. And they said, well, Jacob Butler does it, let's ask him. And so I had the opportunity to do that. And then I actually got to be in that video a little bit. And then they asked us to create these murals that reflected the continuum of the O'Odham to the O'Odham, or like most people know us as the Pimas from the Holcomb, excuse me, I had a hiccup. But in researching what we were going to put out, they actually let us go into that vaki, or that big house, and we actually got to see the fingerprints of our ancestors that built that structure, like all those years ago, and the little hands that were still there. And I got to go into the second chamber and the third chamber, and I got to see that man in the maze that had been carved into that wall all those years ago, and it was special, and we got to replicate that inside of their orientation center. And none of this would have been possible had I just said, I'm not willing to try, and I've done a few other things, Pueblo Grande, I've done stuff there, and it's an awesome feeling to know that people can see your work and identify it as something that belongs to the people, but also has a little bit of flair that you put on it. And in that video too, it said that I was having a baby and I was getting in trouble, and that couldn't be any less true, man. Like I was headed down to the wrong path. I was doing a lot of things that I shouldn't do, and I wasn't going to school anymore. And a friend of mine, or my cousin, asked me, like, hey, I'm going out of town to look at this, to be part of this event on sustainable agriculture, and what was at the time they were calling it permaculture, through the Native American Farmers Association. And he said, you should go because you're just getting in trouble. I said, no, I don't want to do any of that. And then his dad came and talked to me, and he said, you're about to have a kid, and all you're doing is getting in trouble, or, you're either going to end up in jail or dead. Why don't you come with me and find out if this works for you? And so I went, and I didn't expect to learn anything, and what I got to see is these elders from our communities coming out there and talking about the traditional ways of our people, and then how those pueblos did things and how their communities did things, and it empowered me to want to know, like they kept asking, well, what do you guys do, and what do you do, and 18-year-old me didn't really have an answer for that, and that hurt me because I didn't even have the information or the cultural knowledge to pass on to my kids. And that's my son right there in that picture, and all my kids grew up watching me do this, being part of it. My daughter won a herd event for her shell one time, and it was like one of the most awesome things for me, and so when I came back, I wanted to know, what do we do on a daily basis? And these shells were something that interested me, but I hadn't really practiced it, and so I started going out and seeking people's advice and asking them, like, well, could you tell us about our culture? Could you tell us who we were as a people? And I went to people that I knew the culture, and they would say, I don't know anything, don't bother me. Or, I don't have time for you. And at the time I had a shaved head and I wore baggy pants, and like I didn't present myself in a way that people took me seriously. And I think there's this belief that persists in communities, and I follow it too to a degree, that you need to kind of show that you're serious about taking on the role of learning this knowledge and passing it on and being a keeper of this knowledge before someone's willing to share. And so I had a really hard time. And so I said, well, what do we do on a daily basis? We hunted and we gathered and we farmed, we fished. We're Onk Akimel O'Odham, we're river people. So we fished and we used those medicines. And so I learned all those things. I learned the medicines that we can use. I learned the foods that you can eat that come annually. And I learned how to grow food in my backyard. And once I started knowing things, the same people that said they didn't know anything took the time to either correct me or share more. And so, oh, well, you don't do it that way. And, if you do it like this, it's better. And I think they were just waiting for the opportunity to share once they knew I was serious about learning. And I do that too. I wait for the opportunity to share with the people that truly want to learn. And so I would encourage any of you that want to learn something to don't wait for people to seek you out, seek them out and show that you're ready to take on that responsibility that comes with learning these things. Because, you know, they were talking about these are my shells. And in a way they are, but these belong to everybody that came before me, that are here with me, and the ones that'll come after me. And a lot of times, you know, especially today, we feel like we need to make that mark in in the world and be unique and strive for that individuality. And I think in a way I still am able to do that. But it's also something that's very, very humbling and resonates in my heart to know that I'm continuing a way of life and a practice that came long before me. And through my little actions and little part of it, hopefully it would exist long after me. And it's so sometimes it's okay to be a link in that chain. And that's kind of how I live my life, you know, and people ask us to get involved or ask me to get involved in a lot of things and speak out for this and speak out for that. But I think the single greatest change you can affect is in yourself and your actions. And through that change, then you can affect others. And in the work that I do with like the seeds and the garden, you know, it wasn't a big deal to have a garden out here. A lot of people thought that, you know, farming is an antiquated way of life and it's something to be respected as our past. It's not really conducive to success. But we're a sedentary tribe. We're a tribe that was only allowed to be here for so long because we had the infrastructure and the ability to grow our own food. You know, the valley here, there was over 1,000 miles of canal systems running along this river here that irrigated over 100,000 acres of farmland. And that's what Phoenix and Tempe and Scottsdale and Mesa and all these other cities are sitting on, are the fields of our ancestors. So that's a legacy of our people that go back all those years. And today, you know, or well, 20 years ago, that it wasn't that big of a deal. And a lot of people thought that it was something that should stay in the past. But today we have gardens, not just in my program, but we have gardens at the high school that we helped set up. We have gardens at the elementary school that we had a role in. The Boys and Girls programs have gardens. Our youth services had a garden. And we've made an impact throughout the community that children growing up for the last 20 years have had exposure to not only gardening, but gardening specifically traditional foods. And so their mindset now is, why can't we buy these foods in this community? Why don't they exist here? Why aren't we doing that as a tribe? And it was an awesome thing to hear a couple of years ago, those kids get up and talk to our council and ask them to create a feasibility study of if it's possible to get back into farming, because that's the future of our community that are longing and needing that foundation that we came from. And it shows that the impact that our work has had on their lives. And so I think that's an awesome thing. And if I was really being honest with you, I would say that it wasn't to impact their lives, it was to change mine. And so that I can be a better person, not only for myself, but for my kids. And the same thing with this artwork. Like, I do it because it keeps me out of trouble. You know, I do it because it keeps me home and it connects me with my people. But the reason that I take it out and I try to get involved in all these different events and collections and make real lasting work is for my children to be proud of the things that I did, and so hopefully be proud of themselves, and so that there's a legacy for them to fall back on to see when, when my time comes. And now looking back and talking to you guys, like I never even thought I'd be as old as I am today, and here I am talking about a lifetime's worth of work that in reality was just one day at a time, and it was about rising to the occasion and taking on challenges even if you're scared, and a lot of times I was asked to do things and I wasn't sure if I could do them, but I didn't want to say no, and I wanted to at least try. And if I failed, I failed, and for the most part, a lot of those things have came true and came to fruition and actually worked out well for everybody involved. And so I would encourage you all to not necessarily follow my footsteps or do the things that I'm doing, because I understand that you're from all parts of the world or the country, and I would say look at the things that matter to you. Look at the things that you see at risk or being lost, and seek the ones out that still exist, because they're out there. And right now, is a scary time because a lot of them are passing, and a lot of them may not have the opportunity to share in the future. And fortunately, though, some of them have taken the time to document some of their work and to write it down and to share those little tidbits that they have, and with the stories, our stories, they say, well, I heard it a different way, and I didn't hear it the way you said it. That's wrong. And someone shared with me, it doesn't mean that it's wrong. These stories have been passed down amongst families, and families tell them a little differently, or they forget things, or they remember things that they were told, and they share them in a different way. And so when you listen to all these different storytellers, you're getting a more rounded version of that story. You're getting a more true reflection of the original story. And so those little tidbits that your elders have, those little tidbits that you see in books, those little tidbits that you see in the collections and through observation, like those all form the whole picture. And you truly won't understand it unless you take the time to go further than just blindly following one person. And there's something to be said about passing down traditions, but if you really want a true understanding, it's up to you to seek out truths and apply them to what you're doing, and correct the changes that you think are necessary. And so that can be applied to your art, that can be applied to the way you live your life, and a lot of people say, oh, I've known you all like for 20 years, and I've never known you as a bad person. And I'm not. And I like to say that I've been a better dad and a father, a husband, and even at the times, I wasn't always a good husband, But I think if we look over the life that I've lived, I've been a better adult than I ever was a bad kid, and that's kind of something that I'm still striving to do, and this artwork helps me, and hopefully people take joy from seeing it, and I'm able to impact their lives in doing it. And yeah, so I don't know, I just want to tell you guys, if there's questions that you have in regards to the art that I do, seek me out and I'll share. And I always do an overview of what I do, and like a beginner kind of lesson. And if you can do that and you're content with it, then great. But if you want to know more, and you go home and you take the time to learn, and you come back and you say, I have trouble with this, or I need this, then I'll take the time to invest in you. And I would say keep that in mind when you're talking to people, because people, they want to share, but they want to invest that time in people that they feel are serious and not wasting their time. And also, like, I don't require this, but I know a lot of older people, they need things, and they're not able to do a lot of stuff, and sometimes they go without. And so if you're taking the time to go and ask them questions and learn from them and spend time with them, well, understand that they're also taking the time to learn or to teach you and to spend time with you, and maybe bring them something and a gift or an offering that helps them with their lives, because it's a big deal to invest in somebody. And so I would encourage that. And don't be afraid to try, and don't be afraid to fail, because the most of the times, like, good things will come if you do things with a good heart and good intentions, and you try your hardest. Most of the time you'll succeed, and there'll be those times when you fail, and even if you do fail, those are opportunities to learn from as well and be stronger for it. So don't be scared of that. Yeah, and I don't know, I mean, Megan, would you like me to keep talking, or? But yeah, like I said, thank you all for listening to me and letting me just share a little bit about myself today.
I know that we have a question from Mackenzie, a follow-up question, and then we also want to share some of the comments one of the comments that we heard from the live stream. One of the community members, Paula Ignacio, she said, "Thank you for sharing
Great,
your
Paul.
journey, Jacob, your experience. You've experienced many blessings, and you continue to share this awesome craft faithfully to the community. I have much appreciation for you. Your dedication and perseverance is our blessings." So I thought that was really cool, having the community interact and be a part of this experience. Having Jacob here with us is really awesome, and it's a great experience. But we're gonna go ahead and give this last 10 minutes to answer Kenzie's question, because we do know that at this time it's a little bit difficult to be together, to enjoy family. We don't have a lot of gatherings right now because of social distancing. So we'll go ahead and give it to Kenzie to ask a question.
Hi, Jacob. I just wanted to say I was very moved by your whole story, and just hearing the history, and your history is very moving and inspiring in a way. And I just feel very inspired by just your story and hearing your shells and just everything. But I just want to ask the question is, in your definition, what is cultural resiliency mean to you?
I'll see. I don't know. That's kind of a hard question, for me, anyways. But I think there was a time that we had artisans, right? And so, like, if you look at like the time of our hogum, we had these beautiful craftsmen or craftspeople that made pottery and adorned them in like these very intricate designs. And we had textile makers. A lot of people say or think, when they think back to our ancestors, that were running around with breechcloths and no clothes, but they found blouses and garments that were just ornate, and blankets and things like that, and these shell workers and basket makers. And the only way that you'd have time to create artisans like that is to have the ability to really be grounded and sustainable. And I think today we're kind of split up in two different kinds of worlds, and I hate to use that because it's overused a lot, but it's the truth. We walk these paths that we're trying to retain who we are as for me as an author, and even to a point, for me as a jokum too. Like I learned, our jokum history too, but trying to retain those traditional ways is a little harder. And if you want to get involved in something, like, it's harder to have those people that took on those roles. And so then now you have to not only know how to gather these shells, but fabricate them into this ornamentation, and not only how to make the shells into an art, but how to make the wine and how to gather the Dutch and how to do all the things that other people could have done, and through trade and the trade societies that we had those allocations. And today I think we have to try a little harder, and we have to learn multiple facets of our cultural um, heritage. And so for me, like, resiliency and is to me is a struggle. It's a struggle to know and have the understanding of multiple facets to be able to do and teach these things, and it's a struggle to find that balance in your life where you're able to do this and also feed your family and do things for them and get them interested. And so I don't know how to explain it, but it's so worthwhile to do. It's just um I think in the fact that we have so many youth that are interested and so many people that are still carrying on these traditions that go back for thousands of years show that resiliency. It shows that ability to adapt and to continue these practices, even though it may be harder at times and feel like to some people it's not as respected. I was learning about ethnobotanical studies while working at a hockey rink up the road one time, and a famous actor came in and said, "What are you reading?" And so I told him it was the ethnobotanical study of our people and their relationship to plants. And it was something that a guy that I watched as a kid, and I grew up admiring, because he was this famous actor. And when I seen him, I was like, "Oh, it's pretty cool," And he said, "Why would you waste your time reading that crap?" And so that's all old news. We can go to the grocery store right now and get that. If you want to get medicine, just go to the pharmacy or go to the doctor. And that one little statement, it just totally just shot down all the validity of who we were and the things that we hold dear and sacred, and in the face of that, we still are here rising to that occasion to pass on these practices to the next generation. And I think that's true Native resiliency right there. And so if I answered your question, I hope I did.
You did. Thank you, Jacob.
And one of the last questions that we had is what advice would you give to youth or even adults who are going through a tough time with quarantine and even losing family members that are close to them?
I'll start, I guess. And I'm not like a psychiatrist or a counselor or anything, but I've had a lot of loss in my life, and that doesn't go away. People say it gets better, and it in some ways it does, and in some ways it doesn't. I think we're capable of overcoming those things and lessening that pain that we feel when we think about the losses that we've suffered. But I think that those memories will always stay with you, and good or bad, they'll make you shed a tear from time to time, and you'll be driving down the road and you're gonna feel that pain and that loss. And sometimes it's gonna make you smile after you cry. but I think that pain from loss is something that we have to really come to terms with and accept and embrace a little bit in order to get over it, because it stays with you and it changes you a little bit. And right now with this lockdown, my wife is gonna hate me, but me and my wife have been together for 25 years, and I think this last year that we've been locked down together has felt longer than the 25 or 24 years that came before that. but but also keeping in mind, that when it was business as usual and we were working and we were all running here and there, we longed for the days that we can spend together. We longed for the opportunity to do the things that we didn't have the time to do. And I think if you can sit back and take account of that and know that, yeah, we're here not of our choosing, and we're here because of this pandemic that's inundated our lives, but we get to be here with our families, and we get to take the time, even if we don't have families, to work on ourselves and become something better when we come out of this. I think that's something that's strong that can really help you. I sit here and look at my kids, and I'm sorry, I'm saddened that they're sitting on the computer going to the school, but I'm grateful that they're healthy and they're alive and they're well. And I'm grateful for the little routines that we've fallen into, and the time that we all get to spend, like sitting on my bed watching movies together. And those are things that we didn't do and we took for granted, right? And so look for those little things that bring a smile to your face, and understand that, even though we're in this for a reason that we didn't choose, we have an opportunity to spend time with one another that we've never had. And we can make it as good or as bad as we want. And for me, like, I'm really happy and grateful that my immediate family is healthy and that they haven't had to struggle through this sickness. And I've lost a lot of friends. My daughter's boyfriend's actually preparing for his uncle's funeral right now. And he's somebody I grew up with. And so I don't know, like, you have to accept that, and you have to sit with that. You can't block it out because it's going to hurt you later, and you have to come to terms with those losses. We've lost, I think, almost 40 people here in our community, and we're such a small community that I know a lot of those people, and I shared laughs and stories with them, and it's a hard thing to know that I'm never going to see them again. But every day I get up and I'm thankful for being here, and I'm thankful for my family to be here, and I try to keep that in my mind as I walk through this path I'm walking on.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think during this time, it's always good to hear somebody that you look up to and hear their healing words. And, I grew up and I seen you at community events. I seen you talking to my dad, and you always had your kids around you, and your shell work was always right there. And that's who I see you as. I look up to you, and I think the community looks up to you too. So I'm really glad to have you here. And we have comments coming in saying, thank you, Jacob. And, I'm really happy that you were able to spend an hour or two with us. And we're going to be able to post this after. So whoever wasn't able to tune in on the live stream, they can watch it after. So I think this experience was really great. I thank you so much for being here and sharing your wisdom and all of your life experience. That is unique to you, and so thank you so much, Jacob.
Thank y'all for having me, and thank you for sitting with me and letting me talk to you for a while, and I appreciate it. And I hope you have, gained something from me talking. But yeah, thank you.
Alrighty. Bye-bye.
Domni.
Bye.